On November 30th, 2007, a fire destroyed 90% of the buildings along the beachfront strip of Wasaga Beach, Ontario, a town built around the longest freshwater beach in the world. 2 men were charged with arson. That fire happened nearly 20 years ago, and almost nothing has been rebuilt. A $350 million redevelopment collapsed into bankruptcy and fraud charges. The town spent nearly $14 million buying its own beachfront. Developer after developer walked away. And in 2024, the Premier of Ontario had to stand before cameras and say with a straight face, "Folks, don't be pooping on the beach." How does the longest freshwater beach on Earth end up like this? That question is more interesting than it sounds, because Wasaga Beach didn't decline the way most resort towns decline. It didn't get outcompeted by a flashier neighbor. It didn't lose its natural beauty. The beach is still 14 kilometers of white sand on Georgian Bay, still 2 hours north of Toronto, still gorgeous. What happened to Wasaga Beach is something more unusual. The place kept being rescued, and the rescues kept making things worse. Every plan to save it created the next disaster, and the pattern has been running for 70 years. The land itself was Anishinaabe territory for thousands of years, and before that the Huron-Wendat lived in the area until the Haudenosaunee displaced them around 1649. The name Wasaga comes from the Algonquin word Nottawasaga. European settlers came late. The soil was sandy, useless for farming, and for a long time, the most notable thing that happened at Wasaga Beach was a naval battle. In August 1814, during the War of 1812, a British supply schooner called the HMS Nancy was hiding in the Nottawasaga River trying to avoid 3 American warships. The Nancy was an 80-foot fur trade vessel pressed into military service, lightly armed and hopelessly outgunned. When the Americans found her, her commander, Lieutenant Miller Worsley, ordered her scuttled rather than let her be captured. The crew set her ablaze and escaped into the wilderness. The charred hull sank to the riverbed. Over the decades, the current deposited sand and silt around the wreck, and gradually an island formed, Nancy Island, named after a dead ship. In 1928, the hull was raised and placed on the island as a monument. That detail matters because it tells you something about this place from the very beginning. The first landmark at Wasaga Beach was a ruin, something destroyed, preserved, and turned into an attraction. For a long time after the war, almost nobody lived there. By 1896, a small village had formed at the mouth of the river, sustained by fishing and logging. A steel bridge was built across the Nottawasaga in 1909, and suddenly you could actually get to the beach by road. The sand was the highway. Cars, horses, and bicycles all shared the shoreline as a transportation route. Then a family named McLean changed everything. In 1912, John McLean built the Capstan Inn, the first real hotel on the beach. It burned down 3 years later. He rebuilt it. And in 1919, his sons Sandy and Wilson McLean built a dance hall across the road from the hotel. They called it the Dardanella. The Dardanella, the Dard locals called it, became the social center of the entire stretch of Georgian Bay shoreline. Hotel guests would dress for dinner, then walk across First Street to the dance hall for the evening. During the 20s and 30s, all the big bands played there. The building itself was nothing fancy, just wood and ambition. But on a summer night, with the windows open and the music carrying across the sand, it felt like the only place worth being. The McLeans had found the formula. A hotel for sleeping, a dance hall for the evening, and the longest beach in the world for the afternoon. It was simple, and it worked beautifully. Other families saw what the McLeans had done and built their own places. The Wasaga Inn, the Breakers Hotel, the Hiawatha Inn, the Diconia. Each one brought more visitors, and more visitors brought more businesses. By the 1930s, the beachfront had a permanent amusement park called Playland, complete with a Ferris wheel, a carousel, a wild mouse roller coaster, a bowling alley, an arcade. Playland became a fixture of every family's visit. The place you went after the beach, when the sun started dropping and the air cooled off the bay. And between 1935 and 1950, motorcycle racers used the flat, hard-packed sand as a speedway. The Wasaga Beach races were the biggest motorcycle racing events in Canada. 10,000 spectators watching riders tear along the shore at over 100 miles an hour. Think about that scene for a moment. The longest freshwater beach in the world, lined with hotels and dance halls, a Ferris wheel turning against the sunset, and motorcycles screaming across the sand at highway speed. Some of the top American and Canadian riders competed at those races. The sand was flat and firm enough to hold a bike at full throttle, and the straight runs went on long enough that a racer could feel like the horizon was coming to meet him. Nowhere else in Canada offered anything like it. By the Second World War, 100,000 people would descend on Wasaga Beach on a single sunny weekend. The war made it even bigger. Camp Borden, one of Canada's largest military bases, sat about 40 kilometers south. Thousands of young soldiers training for overseas deployment would pour into Wasaga Beach on their days off. They danced at the Dard, rode the rides at Playland, swam in the bay. Many of them already had family cottages along the shore. The connection between Borden and the beach was so strong that a warship, HMCS Wasaga, a Bangor-class minesweeper, was named after the town and served in the Atlantic and at Normandy. The soldiers wrote letters home about the place, and after the war, those friends came too. The beach became synonymous with summer in Ontario. At its peak in the 1940s through the 1960s, Wasaga Beach drew more than 5 million visitors. It was Ontario's summer playground, and it felt permanent. But buried inside that golden age was a problem that would take decades to detonate. The beach was chaos. Cars drove directly on the sand, parking wherever they liked. Biker gangs roared along the waterfront. Development was unregulated and sprawling. The little village of Wasaga Beach, it had only a few thousand year-round residents, simply didn't have the resources to control what was happening on its own shoreline. In 1956, the village council wrote a letter to the provincial government that contained a remarkable admission. The beach area, they said, was growing rapidly and becoming impossible to manage, particularly in view of the fact that the lands are not comprised within the boundaries of the incorporated village of Wasaga Beach. The council's proposed solution was extraordinary. Turn the beach into a provincial park. Hand it over to the province. The province agreed. In 1959, the beach was declared Crown Land, and Wasaga Beach Provincial Park was born. Over the next 15 years, the provincial government expropriated land from residents and businesses to assemble an enormous park. 1,844 hectares eventually, covering a full quarter of the town's total area. Families who had run cottage businesses for decades lost their properties. People who had built their livelihoods around the summer trade, renting cabins, running small shops, operating boat launches, watched the province take their land and write them a check. The province replaced the cottages and small businesses with parking lots, paid parking, so that day trippers from Toronto could drive up on a Saturday morning, find a spot, spend a few hours on the sand, and be home by supper. The beach was now officially a park, managed by Ontario Parks, maintained by provincial staff, and structured entirely around the day-use model. There was no camping, no overnight stays in the park itself. The infrastructure funneled visitors in and out on the same day. The town got what it asked for. The province took control. Cars were banned from the beach in 1973. A paved street, Beach Drive, was built along the shoreline at Beach Area 1. In 1974, Wasaga Beach was incorporated as a proper town, absorbing several small beach communities along the bay. But something had changed. The cottagers were gone, replaced by paid parking. The overnight visitors were giving way to one-stop day trippers who spent far less money. The hotels that once anchored a multi-day vacation economy now competed with a free beach and a 2-hour drive back to Toronto. The province had solved the chaos problem, but it had also, quietly, begun to drain the economic life out of the town's most important asset. And the closings started. Playland shut down in 1985. The Ferris wheel and the Wild Mouse roller coaster and the bowling alley, gone. 2 water parks opened that same year, but neither lasted. The main one closed after the 2007 summer season. The one at Beach Area 1 had already shut down in 2006 and been demolished. By the early 2000s, Wasaga Beach was losing roughly 100,000 visitors a year. Between 2002 and 2012, the decline was steady and relentless. The beachfront at Area 1, the strip where the McLeans had built their hotel and their dance hall, where Playland had turned and the motorcycles had roared, was aging badly. The buildings were mostly wooden structures from the 1930s and 1940s, full of seasonal souvenir shops, ice cream stands, bars, and fast food joints. The town's reputation was shifting from family resort to party destination. The kind of tourists showing up were younger, louder, and spending less. But there was a plan. There was always a plan. In August 2007, 2 brothers named Dov and Armand Levy unveiled a proposal that sounded almost too good to be true. The Levys had started out 17 years earlier with an ice cream parlor in Wasaga Beach. Now they were proposing a $350 million redevelopment through their company, Blue Beach Avenue Corporation. The plan called for 7 hotels, several condominium buildings, 10 themed restaurants, a conference center, a full-service spa, an indoor amusement park with year-round skiing and snowboarding, and a monorail. A monorail to shuttle visitors from an 8,000-space parking lot 3 kilometers away. The head of the Wasaga Beach Chamber of Commerce attended the unveiling and said it was almost like Disney has decided to move to Wasaga Beach, and who would say no to that? The project would require the town to sell 23 properties to the Levys, including a 9.5-acre waterfront block with 700 feet of beach frontage. The town's officials were enthusiastic. The consultants projected thousands of new jobs. Finally, the thinking went, Wasaga Beach would have the year-round destination it had always needed but never built. No more 3-month season, no more dependence on day trippers. That announcement came in August 2007. 3 months later, on November 30th, the beachfront burned. The fire erupted around 1 in the morning, when the buildings along the pedestrian mall were all closed for winter and not a single person was inside. Wind howled across the bay and drove the flames sideways from building to building. The structures were wood, 1930s and 1940s construction, dry as kindling by November, and they burned with terrifying speed. By the time firefighters arrived, the fire was a 4-alarm inferno consuming the entire pedestrian mall area. The OPP sergeant on scene estimated that 50 to 70% of the strip was destroyed or very, very, very damaged. Mayor Cal Patterson arrived in the morning and surveyed what was left. They were all wood, he said simply, so they went up in smoke pretty quick. About 17 businesses were gone. Souvenir shops, restaurants, an arcade, ice cream stands, the Georgian restaurant, a popular eatery whose attached hotel was saved only by desperate firefighting. The restaurant's owner, a man in his late 70s who had run the business for years, was, in the mayor's words, a mess. Nearly 100 firefighters fought the blaze. The damage was estimated at around $5 million. Huguette Chadwick, who had owned a swimwear store called Tropical Trends for 15 years, came to the scene and said, "I'm in a state of shock because we lost everything." She described the other shopkeepers as a Wasaga family. "These people have been here for years," she said, "and now it's all gone. It's never going to be the same." She was right about that. 14 months later, 2 men were charged with arson. The fire had not been an accident. It had been deliberately set, in the middle of the night, in the dead of winter, in a cluster of buildings that had defined the beachfront for 70 years. The motive was never publicly established in a way that connected the arson to any redevelopment scheme. But the timing haunted the town. The biggest redevelopment plan in Wasaga Beach history had been announced just 3 months before someone burned the beachfront down. The Levy brothers' Blue Beach Avenue Corporation was supposed to be the answer. Instead, in 2010, the company declared bankruptcy. The mayor at the time told reporters that the past couple of years haven't been kind to the tourist industry and that there had been major cash shortfalls. The monorail, the indoor ski slope, the 7 hotels, the themed restaurants, all of it vanished. Then came the fraud charges. Dov Levy was charged with theft and fraud over $5,000 in 2012, accused of misappropriating more than $1.2 million in insurance settlement money that had been paid out after the 2007 fire. Armand Levy was also charged with fraud in connection with the insurance proceeds. Armand was ultimately acquitted in 2017. The resolution of the charges left the town exactly where it had been, burned out, planned over, and empty. Meanwhile, the Dardanella still stood. The old dance hall had survived the fire, one of the only original structures that did. It kept operating as a bar and nightclub, a stubborn ghost of the old beachfront, surrounded by vacant lots where souvenir shops used to be. The town tried a temporary fix in 2008, building an entertainment dome on the beachfront. A storm damaged it in 2011. It was eventually removed. Where the bustling strip had been, there was now essentially a beer garden and some kiosks. And the visitors kept not coming back. The beach was still beautiful. It achieved Blue Flag status in June 2007, becoming the first provincially managed park in North America to earn that international eco-certification. But the commercial infrastructure, the restaurants, the shops, the attractions, the reasons to spend money, was gone. What remained was a beach you could drive to, walk on for free, and leave without spending a dime. The town's economy was built around tourism, but the tourism was now almost entirely the low-value day trip kind. People who showed up, used the beach, and went home. By 2015, Mayor Brian Smith had decided that the town itself needed to take control. It was a bold move, and it was also a desperate one. The town of Wasaga Beach, population around 18,000 at the time, purchased most of the commercial properties at beach areas 1 and 2 for $13.8 million. That was nearly 70% of the property tax revenue the town would collect that entire year. The money was borrowed from a bank and from the province. Deputy Mayor Nina Bifolki had voted against the purchase and driven reporters along the empty beachfront in winter, pointing at shuttered fast food joints and bars with cardboard in the windows. "Nothing down here will open," she said. "Who's going to come and park here when it's cold?" The math was stark. Wasaga Beach would collect about $20 million in property taxes that year and spend $48 million in operating and capital costs. The $13.8 million beachfront purchase, financed entirely with borrowed money, was an enormous bet for a small town. Mayor Smith argued it was necessary. The private sector had failed to rebuild. Someone had to step in. The purchase would generate rental income and give the town leverage to attract developers for a proper redevelopment. What actually happened was that the town of Wasaga Beach became a landlord. It collected about $674,000 in rent from the beachfront properties in 2016. But it also inherited property management costs, capital repairs, loan repayments, and the headaches of chasing tenants who didn't pay. 2 businessmen who leased beachfront bars, Bananas and Copacabana, filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the town and the mayor, alleging harsh and vindictive treatment. The town had spent its taxpayers' money to buy its own beach. It was now in the business of managing dive bars and souvenir shops, and it still had no redevelopment plan. In 2017, the town adopted what it called the Downtown Development Master Plan, a 20-year strategy calling for $625 million in capital investment. This was not the town's own money. The plan depended entirely on attracting private developers willing to build hotels, condos, and retail along the waterfront. Fram Building Group, a well-known Ontario developer, signed a letter of intent in 2018. It seemed like the breakthrough. Fram had built successful projects in Collingwood and Port Credit. The mayor was effusive. Then, in early 2019, Fram walked away. The company's president announced the decision on Facebook, which infuriated Mayor Bifolki, who had succeeded Smith. The letter of intent had been allowed to lapse, and Fram was done. The town went looking again. A firm called Slate Asset Management entered negotiations. That fell through, too. Then Baylock Developments and a partner called Zancor came to the table. After a municipal election and a due diligence period, that deal also produced no agreement. Back to square one. Every few years, the cycle repeated with numbing precision. A new developer would appear. Shiny presentations would be made, usually featuring architectural renderings of glass and steel buildings that looked nothing like anything within 50 kilometers of Wasaga Beach. Local newspapers would run optimistic headlines. Council would vote. The public would wait. And then the developer would disappear. Bankruptcy, walked away, deal collapsed, Facebook announcement, gone. The Beach Booster, Wasaga's local paper, kept publishing, kept waiting. Its owner, Joe Bickerstaff, who had visited the town since 1963, called the beachfront ownership situation before the town's purchase a disaster. It remained a disaster after the purchase, too, just a different kind. The pattern was almost darkly comic. The province had taken the beach from the town in the 1960s and replaced cottages with parking lots. Now the town was trying to take the beachfront back from decline and replace vacancy with condos, and it kept failing for the same fundamental reason. Wasaga Beach's economy ran on a 3-month season. What developer in their right mind would sink hundreds of millions of dollars into a resort where the revenue window was Memorial Day to Labor Day and nothing else? And something else happened in 2020 that felt almost absurdly symbolic. High water levels on Georgian Bay flooded Beach Drive, the paved road that had been built along the shoreline after cars were banned from the beach in 1973. The road was buried under sand. It had to be closed. The street that had replaced the old car-on-the-beach chaos was now itself buried by the beach. Nature seemed to be reclaiming what the province had paved over. In the years between grand plans, the town's reputation was eroding in ways that were harder to quantify but just as damaging. Unsanctioned car rallies became a serious problem starting around 2020. Modified vehicles would flood into town on summer weekends. Street racing, stunt driving, donuts in intersections. In August 2022, one of these rallies spiraled into outright disorder. 2 OPP patrol cars had their windows smashed. Drivers did burnouts in the streets, and videos of the chaos went viral on YouTube. The mayor demanded more police resources. In 2023, the town went to the Ontario Superior Court and obtained an injunction against a planned Labor Day weekend rally. Police set up road closures and diverted traffic. This was the new identity of Wasaga Beach, not the elegant dance halls of the McLean era, not the motorcycle races of the 1940s, but smashed police cruisers and TikTok videos. And then came the poop. In the summer of 2024, a TikTok user went viral with a video claiming that visitors to Wasaga Beach were putting up small tents, digging holes in the sand, and using them as toilets. The claim was inflammatory and spread rapidly. The video specifically targeted certain immigrant groups. The original poster said it had been going on for years, particularly at Beach 1. Mayor Brian Smith was furious. He released a statement saying the town had received no evidence from residents, visitors, or the Ontario government to verify that any undesirable, unsanitary behavior has occurred on the beach areas that make up Wasaga Beach Provincial Park. The Ontario Environment Ministry confirmed that park staff had not observed this behavior during their regular patrols. But the damage was done. The story went national. The Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, was asked about it at a press conference about a completely different topic. He said, with visible discomfort, "Folks, don't be pooping on the beach. Simple as that. We have no proof of it either." Here was the Premier of Canada's most populous province publicly discussing fecal matters on the sand at Wasaga Beach. No evidence was ever produced. No photos or videos confirmed the allegations. The ministry noted that staff had occasionally received complaints about defecation or urination on beaches since 2020, but that no specific evidence of these allegations has been found. The mayor said the town's reputation was being gravely harmed by misinformation. But the reputational damage was real. Whether or not anyone had actually defecated on the beach, the story attached itself to the town's name and wouldn't let go. Online reviews from around the same period described the beach in terms that would have been unthinkable a generation earlier. Cloudy water, dead fish left to decay on the sand, mysterious green foam floating in the shallows, garbage strewn across the shoreline, food wrappings, broken plastic toys, diapers, liquor bottles, cigarette butts. Visitors described seagulls swarming because tourists ignored the do not feed signs, dogs in the water despite posted bans, and the general sense that no one was in charge. One TripAdvisor reviewer wrote that the town was in full free-fall decline and that the dilapidated buildings with vacancy signs on them are left to rot. Another described businesses opening and quickly closing, the remains of a demolished water park left piled as visible junk behind the storefronts. It's worth stepping back here and recognizing how far the fall had been. In the 1940s, 100,000 people visited Wasaga Beach on a single summer weekend. Soldiers on leave danced at the Dardanella while a war raged across the ocean. Motorcycle racers hit 100 miles an hour on the sand. Hotels with names like the Breakers and the Hiawatha Inn lined the waterfront. The longest freshwater beach in the world felt like a place that couldn't lose. And yet it had lost, repeatedly, for decades. Not because the beach disappeared. The beach was still there, still gorgeous, still 14 kilometers of sand. But everything around it, every building, every business, every plan, every identity, kept collapsing. The town lost its playland. It lost its dance halls. It lost its motorcycle races. It lost control of its own beach to the province. It lost its buildings to a fire that turned out to be arson. It lost its savior developer to bankruptcy and fraud. It lost its dignity to car rallies and a poop scandal. It lost its blue flag, at least temporarily. It spent $13.8 million to become the landlord of its own vacancy. And through all of this, the Dardanella stood. The century-old dance hall, the one building that survived the fire, kept its doors open, barely, stubbornly. It had evolved from dance hall to bar to nightclub to a kind of living monument to a vanished era. In 2025, the province of Ontario came back with the biggest gesture yet. Premier Ford announced $38 million for Wasaga Beach, including $25 million to revitalize the Nancy Island Historic Site, the monument built around the hull of that scuttled War of 1812 schooner. And then Ford announced something that took everyone by surprise. The province would transfer parts of the provincial park, beach areas 1 and 2, New Wasaga, Allenwood Beach, back to the town of Wasaga Beach. Let that settle for a moment. In 1956, the town had asked the province to take the beach. In 1959, the province did. Over the next 2 decades, it expropriated private land to build the park. Families lost cottages, businesses were displaced, parking lots replaced organic waterfront life. And now, 66 years later, the province was giving it back. Andrew McNeil, the town's chief administrative officer and a member of one of the original settler families, had watched this cycle from the inside. His family had lost a thriving cottage business in 1974 when the park was created. In its place, the province had built parking lots. Now the land was coming back, not to his family, but to the municipality. He described the old days with what one reporter called rose-colored nostalgia, and noted that the town had been a tourism community for over 100 years. Ford stood on the beach and promised it would remain public. But conservationists were alarmed. The provincial park designation had done one thing extremely well. It had protected the natural habitat, including the nesting grounds of the piping plover. This tiny endangered shorebird had been nesting at Wasaga Beach since 2007, producing dozens of fledglings that help sustain the species across the Great Lakes. The park's protections meant that sections of beach couldn't be raked or developed, Birds Canada reported that since 2008, Wasaga Beach had produced nearly half of all Ontario's piping plover fledglings, 87 birds from 59 nests. With the land transferred to the town, those provincial protections would vanish. The plover's future would depend entirely on the town council's willingness to enforce environmental bylaws. Council after council, year after year, while developers and tourism operators pushed to maximize every meter of beachfront. One conservationist put it bluntly: once a plover stops nesting on a beach, it rarely comes back. And if Wasaga Beach loses its plovers, they have very few other places to go. The natural beaches they need, with a mix of vegetation, dunes, and wrack materials, are vanishing across Ontario, lost to beach grooming, development, and shoreline hardening. There is a strange irony buried in this. The provincial park that had frustrated the town's economy for decades, the thing that replaced cottages with parking lots and suffocated the overnight tourism market, had also, unintentionally, preserved the habitat that brought the plovers. The protection that damaged the town's business had saved an endangered species. Now the business interests were winning, and the species was in danger. The development plan that emerged called for the demolition of the remaining beachfront buildings at Beach Area 1, including the Dardanella, the century-old dance hall, the building the McLean brothers had raised in 1919 to complement their family hotel, the place where soldiers on leave from base Borden danced through the war years, the building that the big bands played in the 20s and 30s, the one structure that had somehow survived the 2007 fire. It was slated for demolition to make way for a new hotel, residential condominiums, and retail space. By the summer of 2024, demolition crews were already in the area. Beach 1 that August, according to one report, was the final summer before demolition of the beachfront stores for redevelopment. Visitors who came to see the old strip one last time found a handful of quiet businesses, a smokehouse, a souvenir shop, a motel, surrounded by construction fencing and the shell of the abandoned arcade. In 2024, the town announced a partnership with Sunray Group of Hotels for a new project, a 120 to 150 room hotel, a restaurant, event spaces, retail, and a mixed-use residential component on 4 acres across from Beach Area 1. The project also included preliminary discussions about an assisted living retirement home. That detail says something about what Wasaga Beach has become. A town with an average age of 50, where more than a third of the population is over 65, where the median income sits far below the provincial average, and where the most promising new business idea is a place for people to grow old. The population has been growing, about 25,000 year-round residents as of 2021, up from around 21,000 in 2016. But the growth is driven largely by retirees and people priced out of the Toronto housing market, not by any economic engine the town itself has created. The unemployment rate hovers around 14%. The main employers are in sales, service, trades, and construction. The construction is largely residential subdivisions spreading across the old farmland and forests away from the beach. Places like Wasaga Walk, a development of 315 townhomes near Beach Area 6. The beach still draws over 1 million visitors a year to the provincial park. That number sounds impressive until you compare it to the 5 million who came in the golden years. And the million who come now are overwhelmingly day trippers. They park, they swim, they leave. The town estimates that 70% of Ontario's population lives within a 2-hour drive. That proximity, which once made Wasaga Beach a gold mine, now works against it. Why stay overnight when you can be home by dinner? As of the summer of 2025, Beach Drive was being rebuilt. The road raised 5 feet higher than the beach to prevent the flooding that had covered it in sand in 2020. The remaining old buildings were being demolished. The Dardanella was coming down. The new development was supposed to finally, after nearly 2 decades of false starts, transform Wasaga Beach into the year-round destination everyone had been promising since the Levy brothers showed up with their monorail drawings in 2007. Maybe this time it will work. Maybe the Sunray Hotel will get built, and the condos will sell, and the shops will open, and the plovers will find somewhere safe to nest, and the car rallies will be kept out, and the TikTok videos will stop, and the beach will be clean, and the tourists will come back, not just for 3 months, but year-round, the way the plans always promise. But this town has heard that promise before. It heard it when the province took the beach. It heard it when the levies unveiled their Disney on Georgian Bay. It heard it when Fram signed on, when Slate signed on, when Baylock signed on. Every time the presentation was glossy, the renderings were beautiful, and the future was luminous. And every time the future didn't show up. The sand at Wasaga Beach is the same sand it has always been. 14 kilometers of it, white and fine, curving along the southern shore of Wasaga Bay. On a summer day with the shallow water warm around your ankles and the escarpment visible across the bay, it is one of the most beautiful stretches of freshwater shoreline in the world. That has never changed. That is not what went wrong. What went wrong is everything that people build on top of it. The hotels and the dance halls and the amusement park and the motorcycle races and the provincial park and the parking lots and the seasonal bars and the plans and the fires and the bankruptcies and the fraud charges and the political promises. Layer after layer of ambition and failure piled on top of a beach that never asked for any of it. The hull of the HMS Nancy still sits on the island in the river, charred and preserved, the ruin that became a monument. On the beach where soldiers once danced, demolition crews are pulling down the last walls of the Dardanella.